Today's motion is asking us whether or not the development of self-care culture is something to support. And as the government, we will support that motion today. The framing and model is as follows. Self-care culture is increasingly, say, widespread realization that people have the right to look after their own physical, mental, well-being, like just themselves in general, like sleep, setting boundaries, taking breaks, and taking care of one's mental health before the whole thing like breaks down. And today we defend this cultural revolution where people have the right to take care of themselves without any guilt or shame from others. And our government today presents two arguments. The first is that self-care culture is the first time when people rebelled against this, like, say, social norm that one suffering was a virtue. The central claim here is that in history, as you may know, like society was telling people that the state of being completely drained of energy and happiness was something to be proud of. So say that you work hella hard like for something, and then other people just look up to you because of that dedication, no matter what your mental toll was on that thing. And self-care culture is the first widespread rebellion against that idea. Take hustle culture. Like say take hustle culture. Its core message here is that the more someone produces, the higher their value is as a person. Where like they say that rest is like laziness, and if you're exhausted, that means you're dedicated and stuff. So if you are not like sacrificing your sleep, your health, and your time, then you're just like not doing enough at all. The reason why that phrase exists and keeps going around is that exhausted people are easy to get something out of. You say that they do not have the energy to question the systems that like they operate under or resist what is being asked of them. And self-care culture is the first time when people can act as like a collective, realizing that and also refuse to put up with this kind of bad treatment. And they're also demanding so they can get their own free will, and they also demand so they can be heard. Let's say the impact here is that the opposition has to argue that the world before this was much better, and where the world people's burnout was like celebrated, exhaustion was seen as dedication, and suffering had to be endured quietly. But we also have to ask who the winner is of such understanding, where everyone but the person being exploited, where self-care culture is just recognition of that truth by the masses, and the opposition wants to undo it. Secondly, my substantive is a healthy society absolutely cannot be built without healthy individuals themselves. The central claim here is that the opposition calls self-care like selfish, if you may, but a society is just a community of people, and a society of sick individuals leads to worse results for everyone around them. Where imagine the reality of a society consisting of worn out individuals with deteriorating mental well-being, but people making poor decisions at work and at home, and parents coming back from their work with nothing left to offer their kids. Strained relationships due to everyone being drained, with little knowledge of like how to actually handle it. Which such issues are not like confined to one individual themselves. They spread out to many other people. A parent that was not taught how to take care of themselves creates such an atmosphere for their children as well. So leads to a lot more people. And a company of people that have been exhausted wouldn't make decisions that affect everyone that is dependent on them. So if one person in that company is bad and the other people dependent on them, it would lead to the other like employees or like the colleagues' mental health deteriorating as well. Then the importance of like self-care here lies in the fact that people will be able to help others like through it. Let's say that an individual takes care of their own mental well-being. They have sufficient rest and realizes their limits is going to be more patient and helpful to others. Well, the impact here is that the opposition would have you believe that taking care of yourself means that your actions may harm the society. It is quite the opposite of what is actually happening. A society of people that take care of themselves become a better place for raising children and building communities. So, therefore, through all of this, the government is able to prove superior. So, for all these reasons, I couldn't be more proud to propose. Thank you.
So, hello, my fellow judges and audience. We firmly disagree with this motion. Self-care culture does not make people healthier or happier. It makes companies richer and makes people weaker. And today, my team will prove exactly that. Before I begin, I want to be clear about what we are debating. We are not debating whether sleep is good. We are not debating whether exercise is good. Of course they are, but everyone knows them. But what we really are debating is the culture that has grown up around self-care. The trend of telling people to buy projects, sell boundaries, and put themselves first. That culture is what we oppose. And here's how much involve you today. I will make 2 points. First, self care culture is not really about health, it's about money. Second, it teaches people to avoid hard things instead of facing them, which makes them weaker. My first point is self care culture is not a health movement, it is a marketing strategy. The self care industry is worth around $1.8 trillion, and that includes face masks, meditation apps, and expensive supplement crystals, and wellness retreats. Companies are making enormous amounts of money, and here's how they do it. So they run adverts that say you are stressed and you are burnt out. You deserve to treat yourself. The message is always the same. You are not okay, and this product will fix you. But a face mask does not fix stress. A meditation app does not fix loneliness. The problem is still there. You have just spent money on something that did not solve it. And here is what makes this even worse. People who can't afford these products and people with less money are made to feel that they are failing to take care of themselves. Self care culture creates a new way for people to feel energetic, and that is not caring. That is cruel. And now, my second point is that self care culture does not build strength, it builds avoidance. And real resilience, real mental strength, comes from learning to face hard things and get through them. Every time you push something difficult, you grow. Every time you are told to step away, instead, you do not. But self care culture tells you whenever something feels uncomfortable, you should protect yourself from it. Set a boundary. Take a self-care day. Step back and recharge. And think about what that means in real life. A student who takes a self-care day every time school feels hard will fall behind. A person who ends every difficult friendship because it takes effort will end up alone. A worker who avoids every stressful task will never improve. Sometimes rest is genuinely needed, and we're not saying never rest, but self-care culture applies this to everything, including normal, manageable difficulty that people simply need to learn to handle. And here is something important. Anxiety and mental health problems among young people have gone up. At exactly the same time, self-care culture has grown. More wellness products have self-care advice, more apps, and yet people to feel worse. That is not a coincidence. Teaching people to avoid discomfort does not make them stronger. It makes them more afraid. And for and so today I've shown you two things. And number one, self-care culture is not a health movement. It is a trillion-dollar industry that profits from making people feel like they're failing. And number two, it teaches people to avoid difficulty instead of face it. And that makes them weaker, not stronger. And for these reasons, we are proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Good morning, educated opposition and everyone here today. The opposition has framed self-care as selfish and excessive, but today I'm here to show you that self-care has made a real difference on ordinary people and society as a whole. The world it's creating is genuinely better than the one it replaced. But first, I'll rebut the previous arguments. The opposition said that he's not arguing against mental health or exercise, just people buying products. But that's not what this motion is about. This motion is about self-care culture, not the wellness shopping industry. He spent his entire speech arguing something nobody here is defending. He said the industry is worth $1 trillion. He could not tell us where that number came from. A statistic without a source is not evidence. It's just a blatant lie, and he said it with such confidence. He also argues that companies exploit people's insecurities to sell them things that they don't need. And we agree honestly. But that's a problem with advertising and capitalism, not with self-care intrinsically. Blaming self-care culture because corporations commercialized it, it's like blaming exercise becomes gyms overcharged for their membership. The exploitation and the idea are two completely separate different things that cannot be correlated. And finally, he also said that self-care builds avoidance, not strength, and that real growth comes from pushing through hardship. But there's a difference between productive challenge that makes you stronger and chronic exhaustion that breaks you down. Self-culture says then self-culture identifies the difference between like growth and damage, and that it's not weakness, and that it's common sense. Now onto my substantives. My substantives is that self-care made well-being accessible to like ordinary people. Because for most of history, genuinely taking care of your like mental and physical health was only something that the wealthiest and the richest people of the upper class could do. Therapy was costly, gym memberships were non-existent, and prioritizing your well-being was like a luxury that many couldn't afford, especially in the medieval times. All self-care culture did was took those good practices and make them normal. It created a world where
Can I
ordinary people
make a POI?
no. Ordinary people were finally allowed to say, I need a rest. This relationship is harming my mental health. I need to set a boundary. And because before the shift, an employee who asked if I could have a break because they had stress or depression, they were viewed as weak. A teenager who was insecure was viewed as weak for his friends. Self-care culture created a power and gave it to everyone that allowed them to express themselves. Second argument is that self-care changed what society thinks people are worth. Because for decades, there was a main message within society. Your value as a person is depending on how much you produce, of how much you're worth. And rest was laziness. Like having weakness was treated as like personal failing. Struggling was a bad thing. And failing is a perfectly reasonable response to genuinely bad conditions. Self culture basically directly attacked that. It said rest is not laziness. It says mental healthness is not weakness. And it says being that your worth as a human output, a human being, is not determined by how much you put out. And that had to be said because people need to be told that their matters have real consequences. And if we don't, then that has real consequences, like the medieval times. Conversations about mental health were now ashamed and now are completely normal. Young people entering the workforce can recognize burnout and in ways previous generations couldn't. Employers are becoming increasingly accountable for employees' well-being in ways that seemed unthinkable 30 years ago. The opposition calls it selfishness, but what they're actually defending is a culture that treated human exhaustion as virtue and that human need as a character flaw. Self-care culture said that was wrong and gave mental health crisis that culture produced. So it was absolutely right to say so. 150 years ago, a factory worker in the Industrial Revolution worked 16-hour days, children included, no breaks, no rights, and no concepts that their body had limits. We look back now and say that was barbaric. The culture of self-care is replacing a modernized version of that same logic. Thank you.
Good morning, Honorable Chair, fellow teammates, and opponents. As second speaker, I'll do two things. First, I'll rebut the proposition case, and second, I'll bring on our team's extension on why self-care culture creates unhealthy individualism and takes away responsibility from the things that actually cause these problems. Before I begin, let's remember what this debate is actually about. We're not saying people shouldn't look after themselves. Everyone agrees that sleep, exercise, and mental health matter. But what we're opposing is the rise of self-care culture, a culture that tells people that the solution to burnout, stress, poor mental health is to focus on themselves rather than fixing the conditions causing those issues. So, onto my rebuttals. First speaker proposition said that self-care rebelled from the social norm of being drained. If it was really about rebelling against the social norm of being drained and tired, they would change schools and jobs, not do some skincare or follow a trend, which is what self-care culture is all about. They also mentioned that it takes care of mental health and well-being. No. But that's only true when you have the time, money, and privilege to do it. For many people, the biggest causes of stress are low wages, impossible workloads, or pressure at school. No amount of journaling, skincare, meditation fixes those problems. Instead, this culture convinces people that if they're struggling, it's because they aren't taking care of each other enough. That creates guilt instead of actual solutions. They also mentioned that their side also mentioned that the wellness industry is not involved in self-care. The self-care we're talking about is the one involved with social media, not therapy and exercise by itself. And honestly, like the beauty and wellness industry has the largest importance within social media and within the self-care community. Okay, onto my extension. Our extension is that self-care culture teaches people to prioritize themselves above their responsibilities to others in society. Here's my mechanism. When every message online tells you, protect your peace, cut people off, put yourself first, people start believing that their comfort should be prioritized over helping other people. That sounds a little harmless, but real life relationships don't really work like that. Sometimes your friend needs support when you're tired. Sometimes members need help, even when it's inconvenient for you. Communities only actually function because people sacrifice their own comfort for someone else, and that's okay. Self-care culture reframes these normal responsibilities as burdens from themselves that that should be avoided whenever possible. This creates communities with weaker bonds. People become less willing to volunteer, support family members, or stay through difficult friendships
So
because,
why?
yes,
So are you essentially saying it's necessary for people to sacrifice their well-being for institutions to go well? Are you saying this is like intrinsically true?
I'm not saying that, unless it's a true, harm for you. But for example, when you're drained after work, but your mom asks you to help carry the groceries, you'll do that, right? You're sacrificing a little bit of tiredness just so she could help her, you could help her. That's how it creates a community. Um, okay, for my second impact, self care has become an industry instead of a habit. Companies are always telling people that you need expensive skincare, supplements, retreats, planners, candles, or wellness products just to be mentally healthy. Taking care of yourself now feels like something you have to buy. So, why we win? Proposition celebrates the benefits of healthy habits. We're not denying these benefits. What we're proving is that self care culture goes much further than a healthy habit.
So the opposition wants you to believe that people taking care of themselves is somehow a problem worth debating. And as shown through my team and I, I'm going to show you why that is been proven wrong on our side, of this motion. So I would like to start with some quick rebuttals first. So the opposition pointed out the sides of the sort of self-care industry itself, as evidence through this whole movement as compromise. But that's really an argument about sort of commercialization, not really about self-care culture itself. What I mean by that is the culture is the shift in values and norms that happen, the growing belief that rest is legitimate, that mental health deserves attention, that people are allowed to have their limits. The industry is just what grew around that, and the existence of business profiting from a cultural movement doesn't tell you anything about whether the movement itself is actually good. The fact that something say something is actually making money, the fact that something is actually making money from it doesn't mean the underlying thing isn't real or isn't valuable. People's genuine relationships with their own well-being doesn't become less meaningful because sort of a company decide to maybe sell beauty products. Now I'd like to move on to summarizing my team's case. So the first thing I want to talk about, as evident from my first speaker, is that self-care culture actually presents as a movement. There's a reason why it took off the way it did. It emerged because people genuinely needed it. Across the world, in pretty much every developed country, there has been a growth recognition that well-being isn't something you earn after you've done anything else. It's something that has to be maintained as you go sort of along. Self-care culture is the vehicle through which that recognition becomes mainstream. It gave people permission to treat their mental and physical health as things worth actively investing, rather than things to be dealt with only when they become sort of a really, really big urgent problem. Okay, and the reason that matters is that when a whole culture shifts in that direction, the effects compound. More people seeking help earlier, more workplaces having to take well-being seriously, and more honest conversations because happening about what people actually need to function well, and that's a meaningful change in how society really operates. Another thing is touched on by my second speaker is about what a healthy a healthy society cannot exist without healthy individuals. The opposition has been treating individual and collective well-being like they pull against each other. But like that just doesn't hold up when you actually think it through. Like every social structure we have runs on people like inside it being like mentally or physically okay. And like self-care culture is what actually produces that. And it's not like working against a society. It's like the thing, like it is pretty much a soul thing that keeps like sort of our modern society going. Like the third thing to like really touch on like is who gets to look after themselves before like this actual culture shift happened. Prioritizing like your well-being was either something like really wealthy people did, or something you like sort of only allowed yourself to do when things like are really like starting to go really bad. Like it's like self-care culture made it normal for ordinary people to think about their health before reaching like a crisis point. And that has been like a real effect on a lot of people. Like people are more willing to seek support earlier. Conversations about mental health that felt completely off limit not just long ago are like sort of now just part of ordinary people's talk. Young people especially are much like better at recognizing when they need help before it turns into something really serious. And like that's a really big shift in how like say a generation relates to their own well-being. And I think it's just a better way to live like what comes before it. Like so like with like all of these points we've made, this is why we cannot be more proud to propose. Thank you.
Honorable panel and esteemed adjudicators, before I begin, here's my speech format. I will provide some rebuttals to team proposition, defend our team's case, and explain why we win. Rebuttals. If you're not sacrificing energy, sleep, time, you're not doing enough. These are the exact words from Speaker 1 from Proposition. First, this argument confuses hard work with burnout. No one on our side is saying people should avoid the effort or responsibility. What we are saying is that exhaustion was never a requirement for productivity or success. Even in olden days, there was never an ideology, which means that you have to physically tire yourself out and take loads of stress just for you to succeed and for people to consider you a normal human being. The idea that you must suffer to be valuable isn't noble, it's just unhealthy. Okay, moving on to my main speech. Panel, self-care is just a facade. What's actually going on underneath the cover will genuinely astonish you. Let me clarify one thing. Self-care and self-care culture are two completely different things. Proposition is confusing these. The act of self-care is good. The act of self-care is taking care of your body, making sure you don't stress too much, not burning out. But self-care culture is just a lazy social media trend that people use as a facade to sell products, act selfish, and become lazier. Proposition will argue that it's good and people deserve to care for themselves, but that just means they're scratching the surface. Self-care culture promotes unhealthy habits, but since it's made by social media, some people are starting to believe and acknowledge it, and then because some people are, the domino effect occurs, and now it's such a big thing when it shouldn't be. There's some things in self-care culture that are just wrong. Self-care culture's one of the biggest problems is that it promotes life being simple and easy. Difficulty should be ignored. This is causing individuals to abandon relationships and avoid responsibility, which can turn out society to be worse over time. Why we win. Opposition and proposition have two completely different meanings of self-care culture in this debate. One is saying it's a meaningful lifestyle to improve our mental health, and the other is saying it's a lazy social media trend made to empty your pockets and start to turn lazy. We win this clash because proposition's whole framing is wrong. As I said earlier in my rebuttal, they said that in the olden days, stressing, burning out, and working extremely hard was considered the norm, and you were penalized if you didn't. As I said earlier in my rebuttal, this is just wrong, which is why their self-care argument they're trying to frame it so like their self-care argument makes it so that society is becoming better over time. But their framing is wrong from the start. So it was never like society was never completely the way they're describing it wrong before, which is why I think we win this clash as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, honorable fellow teammates, and opposition. Opponents. Sorry. Proposition wants this debate to be about whether self-care is good. It's not. Everyone agrees that people should sleep well, exercise, and take care of mental health. We were never against them. The question is whether we should support a culture that tells people the answer is burnout and stress. To burnout and stress is to work on themselves. Our response is pretty easy. That's the wrong solution. Through this debate, a proposition keeps giving you ways that you can cope and why self-care is better to cope. We told you why people are actually struggling in the first place. That matters much more. Because if schools and workplaces and society keep creating unhealthy pressure, teaching people better coping mechanisms like self-care doesn't solve anything. It just helps them survive a little bit longer in a bad system. Our side says responsibility belongs with the one creating with the systems creating the problems. And that's why we win, because it's a much fairer world, and it's the one that only creates lasting change. Finally, we'll just look at the impact. The proposition's best case is that people feel a little better for a while. Our case is that society actually gets better. A world that fixes problems is always better than one that will just find a way to live with it. For these reasons, we ask you to oppose.
The opposition built their entire case on two things: that self-care culture is a commercial scam, and that the rise of it is harmful, even though they support caring for yourself. And if you pull both of them apart, their whole case collapses, and there is nothing left. On the first negative, the entire case rested on a $1 trillion figure with no source attached at all. A number said so confidently without any reference to where it came from, it carries no weight in this debate whatsoever. And even if those numbers were accurate, even though 100% isn't, all it proves is that people wanted to take care of themselves so much that the entire industry, grew around it. The first negative accidentally proved how much people needed this cultural shift, which supports our case. On the second negative, they said that they support caring for yourself, but oppose the rise of self-care culture itself. The rise of self-care culture is just more people caring for themselves. Supporting one while opposing the other is a direct contradiction made within a single argument. So again, this just doesn't stand at all. They also argued self-care is just following skincare trends or something. But the info side, both teams agreed to define self-care as sleep, boundaries, exercise, and also mental health. They also argued against the model that the government prime minister has set, and you just can't do that. They also argued against the definition that nobody in the room ever used. On the third negative, they claimed that self-care and self-care culture are completely different things, and the government had the wrong definition. But the government set the definition at the very start of this debate. That is how this format works. The opposition had every opportunity to challenge that definition in the first negative speech, but they never did. And crucially, they said our definition was wrong, but never explained once actually why. Telling us that someone is wrong, but without giving a single reason, is not a rebuttal at all. And where the government showed self-care culture is people collectively saying, pushing back against a system that they treated their exhaustion as a virtue. But the opposition contradicted themselves, argued against the definition we invented, and never substantively engaged with our case. So, for all these reasons, the opposition case just falls apart, and I could not be more proud to propose. Thank you very much.